The sun was shining brightly over the small suburban neighborhood, casting a warm golden glow across everything it touched. The air smelled faintly of chlorine and freshly cut grass, a perfect mix for a lazy summer afternoon. In the middle of it all stood the community pool, its surface shimmering like glass under the sunlight. Families had gathered around, enjoying the cool water and each other's company. Kids splashed and laughed while parents lounged on chairs, sipping cold drinks, and chatting about their weekends. 10-year-old Marcus Johnson was having the time of his life. He loved coming to the pool. It was one of his favorite places during the summer break. Today, he wore his favorite pair of swim trunks, bright blue with tiny white stars scattered across them. They were a gift from his mom last Christmas, and every time he put them on, he felt unstoppable. Right now, Marcus was standing at the edge of the deep end, ready to show off his best cannonball jump. With a running start, he leaped into the air, curling himself into a tight ball before hitting the water with a loud splash. Waves rippled outward, drenching anyone nearby who wasn't quick enough to move away. "Whoa!" shouted a boy sitting on the steps of the shallow end, laughing as water dripped down his face. Marcus popped back up to the surface, grinning ear to ear. "Did you see that?" he called out to no one in particular. Everyone within earshot chuckled or nodded, amused by his enthusiasm. For a moment, Marcus felt like the star of the show. But as he swam toward the side of the pool to climb out, something caught his attention. A sudden burst of noise coming from the shallow end. A group of kids had been horsing around near the stairs, and one of them accidentally kicked too much water onto a woman lounging nearby. She let out a startled yelp, her book slipping from her hands and landing in the puddle forming around her chair. The lifeguard, a tall, lanky young man named Ryan, shot to his feet immediately. From his perch high above the pool, he scanned the area, his expression darkening when he spotted Marcus climbing out of the water. "Hey, kid," Ryan barked, pointing directly at Marcus. "What did I just say about splashing people? Watch what you're doing." Marcus froze mid-step, confusion washing over him. He hadn't been anywhere near the woman or the group of kids causing trouble. Why was Ryan yelling at him? Slowly, he turned to look at the lifeguard, unsure whether to speak up or stay quiet. His chest tightened slightly as Ryan's piercing gaze locked onto him. There was something about the way Ryan looked at him, cold and unkind, that made Marcus feel uneasy. It wasn't the first time someone had treated him differently because of the color of his skin, but it still stung every time it happened. For a few seconds, Marcus just stood there, dripping wet and unsure of what to do next. Should he explain himself? Or would that only make things worse? He glanced around, hoping someone might step in and defend him, but most of the adults either avoided eye contact or pretended not to notice. A few kids whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening, but none of them dared to speak up. Ryan didn't wait long before taking matters into his own hands. He climbed down from his lifeguard chair and marched over to where Marcus stood frozen. Each step he took seemed heavier than the last, his flip-flops slapping against the concrete with an almost menacing rhythm. When he reached Marcus, he grabbed him firmly by the arm and yanked him away from the pool. Marcus stumbled, his bare feet slipping on the wet ground beneath him. Gasps echoed through the crowd as they watched the scene unfold. "Leave him alone," shouted another child, a girl about Marcus's age, but Ryan ignored her completely. Instead, he gave Marcus a hard shove, sending him sprawling onto the rough pavement. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he looked up at Ryan, who loomed over him like a storm cloud threatening to burst. "Maybe next time you'll listen when I tell you something," Ryan said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. His tone was sharp, almost cruel, and it sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Parents exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering nervously to each other. Others quickly ushered their children away, not wanting to get involved. One mother, Lisa, shook her head disapprovingly but stayed seated, unsure how to react. The atmosphere around the pool had shifted dramatically, the once carefree vibe replaced by tension and unease. Unbeknownst to everyone, help was already on the way. Marcus's mom, Angela, had been stuck in traffic after finishing a meeting at work. She was running late, which wasn't unusual for her busy schedule, but she always made it a point to spend at least part of her weekends with Marcus. As she pulled into the parking lot, she noticed the commotion near the pool. Through the chain-link fence, she saw Marcus lying on the ground, tears streaming down his face and Ryan towering over him menacingly. Angela's heart skipped a beat. Her fingers clenched tightly around the steering wheel as anger surged through her veins. Without hesitation, she grabbed her purse and bolted out of the car, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She didn't care about anything else in that moment. All that mattered was getting to her son. When Angela arrived at the gate, she pushed it open with such force that it slammed against the fence behind it. Every head turned in her direction as she stormed toward the scene, her presence commanding immediate attention. Her sharp voice cut through the tense silence like a knife. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her eyes blazing as they locked onto Ryan. Ryan turned, startled by the sudden intrusion. For a brief second, he seemed uncertain, his earlier bravado faltering. But then he crossed his arms defensively and sneered. "Your kid was causing trouble," he said, gesturing vaguely toward Marcus. "I was just trying to keep things under control." Angela knelt beside Marcus, brushing his hair back gently as she checked for injuries. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded, though tears still streaked his cheeks. Satisfied that he wasn't seriously hurt, Angela rose to her full height and faced Ryan again. "You think this is keeping things under control?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You laid your hands on my son, for what? Splashing water? Being a child?" By now, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring nervously. Some people pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the situation was spiraling out of his favor. Angela took a step closer to Ryan, her presence commanding. "Do you have any idea what happens when someone abuses their authority like this? Do you know how many times I've heard stories like this? One person abusing their power because they think they can get away with it." Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but Angela cut him off. "No, you don't get to talk right now. You don't get to explain or justify. What you did was wrong, plain and simple." At that moment, the pool manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, rushed over. "Ma'am, please, we can resolve this calmly," she began, but Angela held up a hand to silence her. "Calmly? My son was assaulted in front of witnesses and you expect me to stay calm? Where were you when this happened? Why wasn't anyone supervising your staff properly?" Patricia stammered, clearly unprepared for Angela's intensity. Meanwhile, Ryan tried to slink away, hoping to avoid further attention, but Angela wasn't done yet. "Oh no, you're not leaving," she said, blocking his path. "We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again, not to my son, and not to anyone else." As Angela stood firm, protecting her son and demanding justice, the entire mood of the day changed. What had started as a peaceful afternoon at the pool had transformed into a moment of reckoning. For Ryan, for the management, and for everyone watching. And Angela knew that this was only the beginning. Angela's voice echoed across the pool area, sharp and unyielding. Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy with emotion and intent. Everyone nearby had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. Parents who had been chatting idly now sat frozen, their eyes darting between Angela, Ryan, and Marcus. Children, sensing the tension, clung to their parents or whispered nervously among themselves. Even the splashing in the pool had slowed down, as if the water itself was holding its breath. Ryan shifted uncomfortably under Angela's piercing gaze. He tried to maintain his defensive stance, arms crossed tightly over his chest, but his earlier confidence was crumbling. For the first time since the confrontation began, he looked unsure of himself. His lips parted as though he wanted to say something, perhaps to defend his actions or shift the blame. But no words came out. Instead, he glanced around at the growing crowd, searching for an ally, someone who might back him up. But all he found were blank stares and disapproving frowns. "You laid your hands on my son," Angela repeated, her tone icy but controlled. She took another step closer to Ryan, her presence commanding enough to make him instinctively take a step back. "You shoved him to the ground for nothing, and you think that's acceptable? That's how you treat kids here?" Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. I didn't mean to hurt him, he muttered, his voice quieter now. It was clear he was trying to backtrack, to soften the severity of his actions. He was being disruptive, and I was just doing my job. Disruptive? Angela shot back, her eyebrows arching in disbelief. Marcus wasn't even near the shallow end when that woman got splashed. You grabbed him because you assumed he was the problem, not because he actually did anything wrong. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. And let me tell you something. Your job doesn't give you the right to manhandle children. Not mine, not anyone else's. By now, more people had gathered around, forming a loose circle around Angela, Ryan, and Marcus. Some held their phones up, recording the exchange, while others simply watched silently, their expressions ranging from shock to anger. A few parents exchanged worried glances, whispering about calling the police or alerting the pool management. The situation was escalating quickly, and it was obvious that Ryan was losing control of it. Patricia, the pool manager, finally managed to push her way through the crowd. She was a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her face was flushed and she looked flustered as she approached Angela. "Ma'am, please," Patricia said, raising her hands in a gesture of calm. "Let's try to resolve this peacefully. There's no need to make a scene." Angela turned to face Patricia, her expression unwavering. "A scene? Are you serious right now?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "Your lifeguard assaulted my child in front of everyone here. If that's not a scene, then what is?" Patricia hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Angela's directness. She adjusted her glasses nervously before speaking again. "I understand that this is upsetting, but we can handle it internally. We'll review the incident and take appropriate action. Please, trust us to do the right thing." Angela stared at Patricia for a long moment, her jaw tightening. Then she shook her head slowly. "Trust you? After what I've seen today? No, thank you. I'm not leaving until I know exactly what's going to happen to him." She pointed at Ryan, who flinched at the accusation in her tone. The crowd murmured in agreement. One man, wearing a baseball cap and holding a towel over his shoulder, stepped forward. "She's right," he said, addressing Patricia. "That guy shouldn't be working here if he thinks it's okay to push kids around. What kind of example is that setting?" Others nodded in support, emboldened by the man's words. A young mother with 2 toddlers clinging to her legs added, "We bring our families here to feel safe. This isn't safe, not with him around." Patricia's face grew redder as the criticism mounted. She glanced at Ryan, who was now standing awkwardly off to the side, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of the accusations against him. Finally, Patricia sighed heavily and turned back to Angela. "All right," she said reluctantly. "Ryan will be suspended pending an investigation. Is that acceptable?" "No," Angela replied without hesitation. Her answer silenced the crowd instantly. All eyes were on her now, waiting to see what she would say next. "Suspension isn't good enough. He needs to be fired today, right now, and I want everyone here to know why, so no one else has to go through what my son did." Her words sent a ripple through the crowd. Some people nodded approvingly, while others whispered their agreement. Ryan, however, looked panicked. He opened his mouth to protest, but Angela cut him off before he could speak. "Don't even try to argue," she said sharply. "You lost the right to defend yourself the moment you put your hands on my son." For a brief moment, there was complete silence. The only sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the faint hum of cicadas in the trees surrounding the pool. Then slowly one person began to clap. It was the man in the baseball cap, his applause slow and deliberate. Soon others joined in, their claps growing louder and more rhythmic. The sound filled the air, a show of solidarity with Angela and a message to Ryan that his behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Patricia looked overwhelmed, torn between maintaining order and appeasing the crowd. Eventually, she threw up her hands in defeat. "Fine," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Ryan, you're fired. Effective immediately. Go home and wait for further communication from HR. Ryan's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked like he might argue. But instead, he muttered something under his breath and turned to leave. As he walked away, the crowd parted to let him pass, their stares following him, until he disappeared through the gate. Angela watched him go, her expression unreadable. Once he was gone, she knelt beside Marcus again, pulling him into a tight hug. "It's okay now, baby," she whispered, stroking his hair. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Marcus clung to her, tears still streaming down his face, but he nodded weakly. Around them, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to express their support for Angela. Some offered kind words, while others simply patted her on the shoulder or gave her a reassuring smile. Even Patricia approached cautiously, apologizing profusely and promising to implement better training for the staff moving forward. As the chaos subsided and the pool returned to a semblance of normalcy, Angela stayed seated with Marcus, holding him close. She knew the day's events would leave a mark on both of them, but she also felt a sense of pride. By standing up for her son, she had shown him, and everyone else, that injustice couldn't be ignored. And though the road ahead might be difficult, she was determined to ensure that Marcus never doubted his worth again. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. By evening, videos of Angela confronting Ryan had gone viral online, sparking conversations about accountability and the treatment of children in public spaces. Many praised Angela's courage, calling her a role model for parents everywhere. Others shared similar stories of discrimination and abuse of power, vowing to speak out if they ever found themselves in similar situations. For Marcus, the day had been overwhelming. Though he was still shaken, he couldn't help but feel a little proud, too. Watching his mom stand up to Ryan had taught him something valuable. That strength wasn't about size or authority. It was about standing firm in the face of wrongdoing. And as he sat with Angela on the porch later that night, listening to the crickets chirp in the warm summer air, he realized something else. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would always have someone in his corner ready to fight for him. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the pool area. The golden light softened the sharp edges of the day's events, but the tension still lingered in the air. Angela sat on a bench near the pool, her arm wrapped protectively around Marcus. Though the crowd had mostly dispersed and the water was calm once again, the weight of what had happened pressed heavily on both of them. Marcus leaned into his mom, his small body trembling slightly as he tried to process everything that had unfolded. Angela could feel the exhaustion radiating from her son. His tears had slowed, but his eyes were red and swollen, and his face carried a mixture of fear and confusion. She wanted nothing more than to take him home, tuck him into bed, and let him forget about the world for a while. But she knew they couldn't leave just yet, not until she made sure this wouldn't happen again. Not to Marcus and not to any other child who came to the pool expecting safety and fun. Patricia, the pool manager, hovered nearby, clearly unsure of what to do next. She kept glancing at Angela, as though waiting for another outburst or demand. Angela ignored her for now, focusing instead on comforting Marcus. "You're safe," she murmured softly, brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead. "No one is going to hurt you here anymore." Marcus nodded faintly, though his grip on her tightened. He didn't say anything. He rarely did when he was upset, but Angela understood. Words weren't always necessary between them. They had always shared a quiet kind of bond, one built on trust and unconditional love. Today had tested that bond, but it had also strengthened it. Angela vowed silently to never let anyone break it. Finally, Patricia approached cautiously, her hands clasped together in front of her. "Mrs. Johnson," she began, her voice hesitant, "I want to apologize again for everything. What happened today was unacceptable, and I assure you, we'll be taking steps to ensure it doesn't happen again." Angela looked up at her, her expression unreadable. "Steps?" she repeated, her tone neutral but firm. "What kind of steps?" Patricia hesitated, fumbling for words. "Well, First, we'll conduct an internal review of all our staff members. We'll implement stricter training programs, especially regarding how to handle conflicts with children. And of course, Ryan won't be allowed back here under any circumstances. Angela studied Patricia's face carefully, searching for sincerity. After a moment, she nodded slowly. Good. Those are good starts. But actions speak louder than words, Patricia. If something like this happens again, if anyone else feels unsafe here, I promise you I won't stay quiet. Neither will the rest of this community. Patricia swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. Understood. You have my word. Satisfied for now, Angela turned her attention back to Marcus. She gently tilted his chin upward so their eyes met. How are you feeling, sweetheart? She asked, her voice softer now. Do you want to talk about it? Marcus shook his head, avoiding her gaze. Angela sighed quietly but didn't push him. She knew he needed time to process everything. For now, being close to her was enough. She kissed the top of his head and stood up, pulling him along with her. Let's go home, she said. We've had enough excitement for one day. As they walked toward the parking lot, several people stopped them along the way. Some offered hugs, others simply thanked Angela for standing up for justice. One elderly woman placed a gentle hand on Angela's shoulder and said, "You did the right thing. Don't ever doubt that." Angela smiled weakly, grateful for the support but too drained to respond much. When they reached the car, Angela opened the passenger door for Marcus and helped him climb inside. As she buckled him in, she noticed his hands gripping the edge of the seat tightly. His knuckles were white and his breathing was shallow. Her heart ached seeing him like this, but she reminded herself that healing would take time. For now, she just needed to be there for him. The drive home was quiet. Marcus stared out the window, watching the trees blur past as they drove through the suburban streets. Angela glanced at him occasionally, wishing she could say something, anything, to make things better. But some wounds couldn't be healed with words alone. Instead, she reached over and placed a reassuring hand on his knee. He didn't pull away, which she took as a small victory. When they arrived home, Angela parked the car and led Marcus inside. Their house was modest but cozy, filled with photos of family vacations, school portraits, and handmade crafts from Marcus's elementary school projects. It was a place where laughter usually echoed through the halls, but today it felt unusually silent. Angela guided Marcus to the couch and sat down beside him. "Do you want something to eat?" she asked gently. "Or maybe a snack? Ice cream?" Marcus shook his head again, his gaze fixed on the floor. Angela sighed and wrapped an arm around him, pulling him closer. "It's okay if you don't feel like talking," she said after a moment. "But I want you to know that whatever you're feeling right now, it's valid. You didn't deserve what happened today. No one does." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes again, spilling over onto his cheeks. He buried his face in Angela's shoulder, letting out a muffled sob. Angela held him tightly, rocking him back and forth as she whispered soothing words. "I'm here, baby, I'm here, you're safe now." For several minutes they stayed like that, mother and son clinging to each other as the weight of the day slowly lifted. Eventually, Marcus's crying subsided, and he pulled away slightly, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Why did he do it?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Angela hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes people treat others unfairly because they don't understand them, or because they think they can get away with it. But none of that is your fault, Marcus, none of it. You didn't do anything wrong." "But why me?" Marcus persisted, his brow furrowing. "Why did he pick me?" Angela's chest tightened at the question. She wished she could shield him from the harsh realities of the world, but she knew that wasn't possible. Instead, she decided to give him an honest answer, one that acknowledged the truth without crushing his spirit. "I don't know why he chose you," she admitted. "Maybe it was because of the color of your skin. Maybe it was because he thought he could intimidate you. But none of those reasons matter. What matters is that you stood tall, even when it was hard. And I stood tall with you." Marcus looked at her, his wide eyes searching hers for reassurance. "Will it happen again?" he asked, his voice trembling. Angela cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. Not if I have anything to say about it, she promised. And not if you keep believing in yourself. You're strong, Marcus. Stronger than you realize. And no matter what happens, I'll always be here to remind you of that. A small smile tugged at the corners of Marcus's lips, though his eyes still glistened with unshed tears. Okay, he whispered. Okay, Angela echoed, pulling him into another hug. Later that evening, after Marcus had fallen asleep, Angela sat alone in the living room, staring at the wall. The adrenaline from earlier had worn off, leaving her drained but restless. She replayed the day's events in her mind, analyzing every detail. The look on Ryan's face, the whispers of the crowd, the way Marcus had clung to her like she was his lifeline. Each memory stirred a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, pride, and determination. She picked up her phone and scrolled through social media, where videos of the confrontation continued to circulate. Comments poured in from strangers praising her courage and condemning Ryan's actions. Some even shared personal stories of similar encounters, thanking her for speaking out. Angela read them all, her resolve strengthening with each message. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about protecting every child who deserved to feel safe and valued. As midnight approached, Angela finally set her phone aside and leaned back against the couch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now she allowed herself a moment of peace. Her son was safe. Justice had been served, at least partially, and she had reminded herself of something important. Standing up for what was right wasn't easy, but it was always worth it. With that thought, Angela closed her eyes and let sleep take her, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, she and Marcus would face it together. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of Angela's living room, casting warm golden beams across the carpet. Birds chirped cheerfully outside, their songs mingling with the distant hum of lawn mowers and neighborhood chatter. It was a typical summer day, but inside the house the calm didn't quite match the storm that had passed just hours earlier. Angela woke up on the couch, her neck stiff from sleeping in an awkward position. She stretched slowly, wincing as she sat upright. The events of the previous day came rushing back to her. The pool, Ryan's aggression, Marcus's tears, and the confrontation that followed. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe deeply, grateful that it was over. But she knew there was still work to be done. Justice wasn't complete until real change happened, not just at the pool, but everywhere. She glanced toward Marcus's bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. He was still asleep, his small frame curled under the blankets. Angela smiled faintly, feeling a wave of protectiveness wash over her. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would always put him first. Quietly, she stood and tiptoed to the kitchen to start breakfast. Pancakes were his favorite, and she hoped they might bring a little light to his day. As the pancakes sizzled on the stove, Angela opened her laptop and began scrolling through emails. Overnight, dozens of messages had flooded her inbox, some from friends and family offering support, others from strangers moved by her actions. One email caught her attention. It was from a local news station asking if she'd be willing to share her story for an interview. Angela hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. She hadn't sought attention when she confronted Ryan, but maybe this could help amplify her message. Maybe it could inspire others to stand up against injustice too. Before she could decide, Marcus shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes sleepily. His hair stuck out in every direction, and he wore his favorite pajama set, a mismatched pair of shorts and a faded t-shirt with a cartoon superhero on it. Despite everything, seeing him like this made Angela's heart swell with love. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said softly, setting a plate of pancakes on the table. "I thought we could have a lazy breakfast before deciding what to do today." Marcus climbed onto his chair and picked up his fork, poking at the pancakes half-heartedly. "Are we going back to the pool?" he asked after a pause, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Angela shook her head firmly. "Not anytime soon. Not until I'm sure it's safe for you. And for everyone else." She reached over and ruffled his hair affectionately. But don't worry about that now. Let's focus on today, okay? Just us. Marcus nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. Angela watched him eat, noting how quiet he was compared to his usual bubbly self. She wanted desperately to lift the weight off his shoulders, but she knew healing wouldn't happen overnight. Instead, she focused on keeping things light. "So, what do you want to do after breakfast?" she asked. "We could watch a movie or play board games or even build a fort in the living room." A flicker of interest crossed Marcus's face at the mention of building a fort. "Can we use the chairs and blankets?" he asked, perking up slightly. "Absolutely," Angela replied with a grin. "Anything you want." After breakfast, they spent the morning constructing an elaborate blanket fort in the living room. Pillows became walls, blankets turned into ceilings, and chairs served as sturdy supports. By the time they finished, the fort was big enough for both of them to crawl inside comfortably. They sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by soft fabric and dim light filtering through the layers of blankets. "This is awesome," Marcus said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement for the first time in days. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it around the makeshift structure, giggling as the light danced across the walls. Angela laughed along with him, enjoying the rare moment of joy. "It sure is," she agreed. "Maybe we should live in here forever." "For real?" Marcus asked, wide-eyed. "Well, maybe not forever," Angela teased. "But for today, it's perfect." They spent the next hour telling silly stories and playing word games, letting laughter fill the space where tension had lingered only hours before. For a while it felt like life was normal again, or as close to normal as it could be. But Angela couldn't shake the nagging thought that there was more she needed to do. Protecting Marcus meant more than shielding him from harm. It meant creating a world where he wouldn't have to fear unfair treatment because of the color of his skin. Later that afternoon, Angela decided to revisit the emails she'd received earlier. One particular message stood out, a note from a community organizer named Lisa, who had seen the video of Angela confronting Ryan. Lisa praised Angela's courage and invited her to join a meeting later that week to discuss ways to address systemic issues within recreational spaces like pools, parks, and schools. Angela read the email twice, considering its implications. Attending the meeting would mean stepping into a larger role, one beyond being just a protective mother. It would mean advocating for change on behalf of all families who faced similar struggles. Was she ready for that responsibility? Could she handle the pressure? Her thoughts were interrupted by Marcus's voice. "Mom, can we go outside?" he asked, peeking into the living room from the hallway. "Just for a little bit?" Angela hesitated. Going outside felt like a step forward, a way to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But she also worried about exposing him to potential judgment or hostility. Still, staying cooped up indoors wasn't healthy either. After a moment's deliberation, she nodded. "Sure, sweetheart. Let's go." They headed to the backyard where tall oak trees provided shade and the air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass. Angela brought out a soccer ball, and they kicked it back and forth, laughing as it occasionally veered wildly off course. Watching Marcus run and play, his smile returning bit by bit, reassured Angela that he was resilient. He was strong even if he didn't realize it yet. That evening, after tucking Marcus into bed, Angela returned to the living room to think. She pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas, ways to ensure incidents like yesterday's never happened again. She wrote about stricter training for staff members, clearer policies for handling conflicts, and open discussions about bias and discrimination. As she scribbled, inspiration struck her. Perhaps she could create a guidebook or host workshops for parents and caregivers, teaching them how to advocate for their children effectively. By the time she finished writing, it was late, but Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging, but she was determined to make a difference, not just for Marcus, but for every child who deserved to feel safe and valued. The following days passed quickly. Angela attended the community meeting organized by Lisa, where she shared her story and listened to others recount similar experiences. Together, they brainstormed solutions and drafted proposals to present to local officials. Word of Angela's efforts spread throughout the neighborhood, earning her respect and admiration from those who believed in equality and justice. At home, Marcus continued to heal. Slowly but surely, his confidence returned. He started playing, with neighborhood kids again, his laughter echoing through the streets once more. Angela kept a close eye on him, ensuring he felt supported and loved every step of the way. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand to the park, Marcus looked up at Angela and asked, "Do you think people will listen to us?" Angela knelt down so they were eye level, her expression serious but hopeful. "Some will and some won't," she admitted. "But we have to keep trying anyway. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen, if we fight for it." Marcus nodded solemnly, then broke into a grin. "Okay, Mom. Let's fight together." And with that, they continued walking side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Angela and Marcus. Life had changed in ways neither of them could have predicted, but they were learning to adapt, to find strength in each other and in the growing support around them. Angela threw herself into her new role as an advocate, attending meetings, speaking at community events, and working tirelessly to push for change. Marcus, meanwhile, began to rediscover the joy of being a kid again, though he carried with him a newfound awareness of the world's complexities. One Saturday morning, Angela woke up early to prepare for a town hall meeting scheduled for later that day. She had been invited to speak about her experience at the pool and share ideas on how to create safer environments for children. It was a big responsibility, but Angela felt ready. She had spent countless hours drafting notes, rehearsing her speech, and gathering input from others who shared her vision. As she stood in front of the mirror brushing her hair, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Not just for Marcus, but for every child who deserved to feel safe and valued. In the kitchen, Marcus sat at the table eating cereal. He watched his mom move around the room, her energy palpable even in the quiet moments. "Are you nervous?" he asked, tilting his head curiously. Angela smiled as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "A little," she admitted. "But I'm also excited. This is our chance to make things better, for everyone." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, swirling his spoon in the milk left at the bottom of his bowl. "Do you think people will listen?" "They'll have to," Angela replied firmly, sitting down across from him. "We're not asking for anything unreasonable, just fairness, respect, and safety. That's all anyone should expect." After breakfast, Angela helped Marcus get dressed and packed his backpack with snacks and toys to keep him occupied during the meeting. They drove together to the community center where a large crowd had already gathered. Parents pushed strollers, teenagers chatted animatedly, and older residents leaned against walls or sat in folding chairs, waiting for the event to begin. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, a mix of hope and determination filling the air. Inside the auditorium, Angela found a seat near the front while Marcus played quietly with his action figures under a nearby table. Lisa, the community organizer who had reached out to Angela weeks earlier, greeted her warmly. "You ready?" Lisa asked, handing her a microphone and a bottle of water. "As ready as I'll ever be," Angela said with a nervous laugh. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as the room grew quieter. Soon the moderator called everyone to attention, welcoming attendees and introducing the speakers. When it was Angela's turn to speak, she walked to the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. The room fell silent, dozens of eyes fixed on her. For a moment she hesitated, glancing at Marcus sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in his game. Then she began to talk. "I'm here today because of my son," she started, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "He's 10 years old, and he loves swimming, playing soccer, and building forts out of blankets. He's kind, curious, and full of dreams. But recently he learned something no child should ever have to learn, that sometimes people treat you unfairly simply because of the color of your skin." A murmur rippled through the audience, heads nodding in understanding. Angela continued, her words flowing more easily now. "What happened to Marcus wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a bigger problem, one that affects families like mine every single day. And it's not enough to say we're sorry or promise to do better. Real change requires action. She went on to outline specific steps communities could take: mandatory training for staff members on diversity and conflict resolution, clearer policies for handling disputes involving children, and open forums where parents and kids could voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. Her suggestions were met with applause, and several people jotted notes as she spoke. By the time Angela finished, the room erupted in cheers. People lined up afterward to thank her, shake her hand, or offer their own stories of struggle and resilience. Marcus, hearing the commotion, looked up from his toys and grinned proudly. "That was awesome, Mom," he said when she finally returned to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "It's just the beginning," Angela replied, kissing the top of his head. "There's still so much work to do." Over the next few months, Angela became a familiar face in the community. She collaborated with local leaders, school boards, and recreational facilities to implement the changes she'd proposed. Slowly, but surely, progress began to show. Pools, parks, and schools adopted stricter guidelines for staff conduct, and workshops were organized to educate caregivers on recognizing and addressing bias. Families felt safer, knowing their voices mattered. For Marcus, life gradually returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such a transformative experience. He resumed swimming lessons at a different pool, one where the staff welcomed him warmly and encouraged him to dive deeper into his passion for water sports. At school, he joined the debate club, inspired by his mom's courage to speak up. Though he was still shy at times, he found strength in sharing his thoughts and standing firm in his beliefs. One evening, as summer gave way to autumn, Angela and Marcus sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Leaves crunched underfoot as neighbors walked their dogs, and the crisp air carried the faint scent of wood smoke. Angela wrapped a blanket around them, pulling Marcus closer. "Do you remember how scared you were that day at the pool?" she asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Marcus nodded, leaning into her side. "Yeah, but I wasn't scared when you showed up. You made everything okay?" Angela smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I'll always make sure you're okay, baby. But I also want you to know that you're strong too. Stronger than you realize." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes wide and earnest. "Like you?" "Exactly like me," Angela said, squeezing his shoulder. "And maybe even stronger." They sat there for a while longer, enjoying the peacefulness of the evening. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Angela reflected on how far they'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But together, they had faced adversity head-on, proving that love, determination, and courage could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Before heading inside, Marcus paused at the door and turned back to Angela. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Thank you for fighting for me." Angela knelt down to meet his gaze, her eyes glistening with tears. "Always, Marcus. Always." And with that, they stepped inside, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, together,